What's going on, gamers? Today we're going to be jumping into a bit more Diablo 4. What I'm going to be going over are some early game glyphs for your Barbarian that can really help you out, are well worth leveling up early, and can pretty much fit into any build. So if that interests you, stay tuned. That's coming up next. So after investing a lot of time in these nightmare dungeons and seeing what works, what doesn't work, and leveling up probably a lot of glyphs that I shouldn't really have invested many points into, I'm going to be bringing you my top 3 picks for the best glyphs to level up early in order to make the Barbarian work and make your life a whole bunch easier. With a few of these in place, I've been able to push about 10, maybe even 14 levels above my own in these nightmare dungeons, and sometimes it's not always about damage, it's just about being able to survive and make everything work. Now obviously your paragon board is going to open up once you've hit level 50, and you're going to be able to earn 4 paragon points every time you level up after that, and nightmare dungeons in which you'll be powering up these glyphs are unlocked after you reach tier 3. But there's a lot of glyphs you can find. Which ones should you be investing in early, and why should you be leveling them up? Now in this video I'm not going to go too in depth into the paragon board itself, because I think depending on your build and your playstyle you'll probably have a completely different setup to my own. However, the rare glyphs are definitely worth investing in, and I'd say in general try to get yourself at least 5 boards by the time you've hit max level of 100, because then you'll be able to have quite a few glyphs at your disposal. For the most part, the main thing you want to do is focus on making your build work. For example, I'm using this board here. The main reason I'm using it is so that I can get a bit of fury back when I defeat an enemy, which is going to make what I'm going for with my Barbarian much better. I've not picked up too many of the legendary nodes because I don't think they're the best on Barbarian, and after looking at this one I realised that I thought this was Warbringer, not Warbinger. I've been calling it wrong for a long time, but yeah, just make your boards work and you can always change things around later on if you need to. Also, one stat that I would highly recommend pretty much for any build or any class is going to be vulnerability. This is going to make things so much easier. Being able to apply vulnerable is going to make a lot of difference with the damage you can dish out and defeating enemies fast, so whenever you can pick that up within your paragon board, go ahead and grab them nodes. And pretty much on that exact same note, the very first glyph that we're going to be taking a look at is going to be Exploit. This used to be ridiculously overpowered. They've nerfed it somewhat. It doesn't dish out quite as much with the vulnerability now, but it's still definitely worth having and picking up very early. This is going to give you an additional 1.7% damage to any vulnerable targets you're hitting, and it will go up by 1.7% every single time you pick up another 5 dexterity within the glyph's radius. Remember, when you level these glyphs up to 15, they get an additional square added to them, so the radius will be slightly larger and it will be able to pick up more nodes, dishing out more damage. But the reason this glyph is so good is going to be for its additional bonus, where every single time you apply damage to an enemy, they then become vulnerable for 3 seconds. As long as you can dish out a lot of damage very fast, most of the times you're going to knock things down before they even know what's hit them. If we jump over to the skill tree, you'll see with the Barbarian class, it's not actually the easiest to get the vulnerability status. Pressure point is probably one of the best ways. You're going to invest 3 points into this, and then when you're hitting things you're going to have a 30% chance to make them vulnerable for 2 seconds. Other than that, we've got quite a few ways to extend vulnerable, but there's not many ways to actually apply it within our tree. Other than probably just down the bottom here in your weapon mastery. If you're running Steel Grasp, then you may not need to have this glyph, as you'll be able to apply vulnerable pretty easily already. But a lot of builds probably won't be running this, so decide whether or not it's for you. Next up, and we're going to be taking a look at a glyph that is always going to come into play with us, and that's going to be Territorial. With the Barbarian, there's not much you can do about it. You're going to be close range. He doesn't really have too many long range effects going on. This means you'll be able to get a nice bit of additional damage to any enemies that are in close range, which is pretty much most of them all times. And this goes up incrementally every time you add 5 dexterity, so you can quite easily get yourself over 60 or 70% extra damage at top end. Also, another nice feature, as secondary bonus, it's going to give you 10% damage reduction, which I think will really come into play later on as you try and make your way into those higher tier nightmare dungeons. This one is just a solid glyph all the way around, nice and easy to put into any build, and helps with both your offense and your defense. And lastly, one that can help out massively, especially earlier on in your paragon board, and that's going to be this one right here, your Martial glyph. When you read this one out, it doesn't sound anything special, and you could quite easily glance over it, put it to one side and put something else in its place. It's going to grant you a set amount of bonus to all of your magic nodes within an area effect. I believe I've got this one to 15 already, so it's given me 95% bonus, which in itself isn't bad, but it's not as strong as quite a few of the other glyphs. But again, we're going to be using it for its secondary effect. and that's going to be after casting the shout skill. The active cooldown of every other shout skill is going to be reduced by 1.2 seconds. Only as you start to tackle tougher enemies and hard hitting targets do you realise how much you actually need those shouts to be up almost constant for your survivability and to dish out a lot of damage. Most times in those Barbarian builds you can have 2 or probably even 3 shouts put on one of your paragon boards that you think could definitely take advantage of that extra primary effect. So as you can see here with me, I've put on the ones that are going to take advantage of vulnerable. Again, if we go over to our skill tree, you can see that shouts are something that's pretty much going to be your core foundation for the Barbarian class. You're going to have your rallying cry, it's going to enhance your speed, it's going to make sure that you've got unstoppable, probably a little bit of fortified going on. Your challenging shout is going to be your main staple for survivability because it reduces the damage so well, and of course your war cry if you want to be berserking and you want to dish out a lot of extra damage. If you're going for these 3 shouts, this one is definitely worth having in place in order to reduce their downtime and make your build much more viable in those tough instances. Lastly, if you are going to be taking advantage of this glyph, I would say probably try to chuck on some cooldown in place as well. Best things to look at for that is going to be your helmet slot and just up here your amulet slot. Both of these can get cooldown and can make things a whole bunch easier, but yeah, just make your boards work and you can always change things around later on if you need to. As always, there'll be a lot more content on the way from me. For now, take care, I'll see you on next day.